Shadow Minister for the Central Coast, David Harris, thanks for speaking with Central Coast newspapers. The inquiry reports come out today. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think Central Coast residents will be rightly upset with the report. It tells us a lot about what we already knew, but it doesn't really offer us a clear pathway forward. And we would have thought that the state government would have taken the opportunity of this report to actually look at some real reforms that could help Central Coast Council and alleviate the higher rates, higher charges, lower service environment that Central Coast ratepayers are currently caught in.
In the report, it doesn't specifically name the amalgamation. However, it does point out that there were some financial challenges for the cost of amalgamation. Does that mean that issue is now off the table, as our parliamentary secretary has suggested?
Absolutely not. I mean, you cannot separate the two issues. The government had an ideological bent on merging councils. They pushed through a report that still has never been released by KPMG. And then we've had the financial disaster here on the Central Coast, but we've seen councils right across the state struggling financially. The government had an opportunity with a new premier to have a reset. We've got a new minister to go and visit this issue and put forward some options to actually help these councils survive better financially. What we would be asking the government to do is two things. The first one is put forward a financial package that takes the stress away from the commercial loans the council was forced to take out at the time of the financial mess was first found out. They can do this very easily by allowing council to use funds they hold already and to pay that money back internally. And that would take the pressure off that currently exists, where those loans have to be paid back over the next 10 years. That's what's forcing the higher rates. The government could have done that right at the very start, but instead they decided, they didn't want to set a precedent. So they forced the council to go out and source equity in the private markets. And there's a cost to that because the council had to sign up to a much harsher regime of paying back that money. The second thing is they have to look very carefully at not just councillor training, but in these organisations, how they operate in terms of good financial management. So it's no mistake that so many councils are finding it difficult because they are forced to operate in an environment where their only option is to ask for higher and higher rates in order to not increase services, but just to maintain services. And we have a situation where if they can't get those increases, good staff have to be let go for them to maintain their financial positions. Now, one of the easiest things they could do is look at depreciation, which only came in a couple of years ago, which forced councils to put aside money for assets to be replaced, even when those assets don't need replacing, which has put huge financial problems with not just our council, but councils across the state. So there are two things that the government could have done straight away. We welcome the recommendations around better training, but that should have been a prerequisite anyway. If you're going to merge councils into these mega businesses, which they did, it should have gone without saying that there should have been compulsory training for those councillors. You can't just flick people into a role, pat them on the head and say, away you go, best of luck. If the government was really committed to successful mergers, they would have had a much better process in place. What we found from the inquiry was that they had a one-size-fits-all approach to mergers, and clearly that was negligent. They should have been looking at each individual council's circumstances and making sure the merger process was suited to the size of the council. We were behind the eight ball from the start. We know that the Fit for the Future process was left a lot to be desired, And that meant that the operational money for the council right from the start was only about $5 million. Well, good luck with having successful council after that. You throw in all the other problems, the IT problems, the loss of staff, trying to merge the departments together, throwing back in water and sewer and all of those things. And it's no wonder that we're here where we are now. And the government really, through this report, has not addressed any of those issues other than to say, oh, well, we might introduce some compulsory training and that we'll introduce legislation to say that restricted money is restricted money. Well, one would have thought that was pretty obvious in the first place and didn't stop what ultimately happened.
One of the recommendations in there, or is at least a commentary, is around the Water Authority and then clearing up the problems of dual accounting in the Water Authority, perhaps even corporatising it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we've had a discussion ongoing on this for a while. It's been my view for a long time that the operations of water and sewer should be separated from general council operations, simply because it under the current arrangement, water and sewer is regulated by IPART, but it's also regulated under the Local Government Act. So that means that you can not use the profits of the Water Authority to boost your council operations, but any debt from those operations is counted against the council. And that's a ludicrous situation. And it wasn't the case when we had the Joint Water Authority. It's only when they merged the councils and they brought it all in under the one umbrella that we got this problem. So we certainly have two principles that we support. One is that our water and sewer assets should not be privatised. They should be there for the benefit of the public who have paid for it through their rates and charges over decades. And the second one is that the leadership of any water authority should contain people who actually know about water and sewerage and delivering those assets and managing those assets. We can't have a situation like we did in the drought where councillors are debating whether we should have water restrictions or not. That's simply outrageous and not the best way of operating that asset. But the government should ensure that the structure is either one or the other, and that council can take a dividend for ratepayers from any profits, but at the same time borrow the money necessary to actually do the work that's needed to be done. Most of our infrastructure issues in the north are because they can't build water and sewer assets to those sites, and it slows the whole process down. Because of the current structure, council can't go out and borrow more money. But if the structure was more separated, then the Water Authority would be able to go out and borrow against their assets. It wouldn't count on council's books, and that would be a better outcome for ratepayers right across the board, particularly in terms of making sure that we have new assets, but also we can upgrade the older assets that are literally falling apart in particularly the southern part of the Central Coast.
We know the state-owned water authorities of Sydney and Hunter Water do just that. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, I think we can have a hybrid model. We don't need to corporatise, because some people fear that that's the path to privatisation. But what we can do is set it up like the previous water authority, where there's an independent board and the council decides whether it actually takes dividends from the operation of that asset, and that the two financial books are actually kept separate, so that we don't get this crazy thing that we've just been through, where people are using unrestricted funds that they shouldn't be, and there's no delineation. So when you looked at the books, it was all one account and it was just line items all over the place, and that's what's caused some of the problems. So I've said from the start that separating those two operations is essential. It's probably the strongest recommendation that's come out of this whole process. It was something that we put forward way back in 2010. We actually passed legislation to do it, but it was never enacted. So we've been left with the current mess, and most of the debt Central Coast people may not realise, $385 million is actually from water assets that actually are good debts because it's put in place infrastructure that actually makes the council money. So over a longer term, that's actually good debt. Bad debt is when you're actually borrowing to pay wages and things like that. So if you're building assets, it's good. If you're paying wages, it's not so good. And the council got all mixed up with that money moving all over the place. Ultimately, it was paying wages, which is why we had the problem that we did.
Now, on to elections. We noticed that Rick Hart has been reappointed, or it's been said he's been reappointed until there are elections. However, there seems to be a great deal of confusion about when those elections will take place. We can't get a clear answer from the Minister or the Parliamentary Secretary or the Administrator at this stage. Can you enlighten us on when those elections are or should be?
So the original election date was September 2022, which is what the government put forward. If the government is going to change that, they need to inform the community as soon as possible and give a very strong rationale as to why we can't have democratically elected councillors again here on the Central Coast as soon as possible. There may be a reason in terms of the resources of the Electoral Commission to carry out those elections, but the government needs to get that out in the public domain as quickly as possible. What I would say, though, is that when there are elections, those people who want to put their hand up have to understand that their role is not a party political one. Their role is one of serving the community, and that whoever is elected, Labor, Liberal, Green, Independent, whatever, their first responsibility is working together for the benefit of the community and not play party political partisan games. We found through the testimony of the councils that it was a very adversarial environment. People saw that in council meetings, and that's not in the best interest of the community. I mean, at a state and a federal level, we have our arguments, but on important issues, we sit down and we reach common positions because that's what the community needs. So I encourage people when time comes to put up their hand only if their first commitment is to serving the community of the Central Coast and making sure that we have the best local government body that we can, and leave all the other issues at home somewhere else. Fight it out down the pub or whatever you want to do. But that has been a huge contributing problem because councillors were so focused on each other, and that's from their own testimony, that on important issues we didn't necessarily get the best decisions, and that's a cost for the whole community.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say about the report, Mr. Harris?
Only that we want to work in a constructive way with the new minister to get the best results. I have to say, with Shelley Hancock, the former minister, her door was always open and I could talk to her. We didn't always agree on different aspects, but we did agree that we had to try and solve the financial situation in the best interests of the community and make sure that people weren't paying outrageous amounts of money to compensate for what had happened. The new minister gave us a briefing yesterday, and we welcome that, and we hope that she keeps that open door policy, because together we can do what's best for our community, and that's our aim. We do think that the government could do more to help pay the debt. Hornsby Council got $90 million in compensation, and they didn't even merge. And so we say that all we're asking for is equity in terms of that financial assistance, but that restructuring of loans could make a massive difference to the council operation moving forward, and to whether or not council can keep staff and keep delivering the current level of services, which is low at the moment. And so we reach out to the minister and say, we want to work cooperatively and we will support anything that they put forward that reduces the financial burden on Central Coast Council.